Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, episode number 151 of Let's Go Racing. Tyler Jones, Dominic Anagon here with you as we are going to bring in Seth Eggert here in just a bit from Kickin the Tires, as we'll get his insights analysis on the weekend that was at the Chicago Street Race and look ahead to this weekend's race at Pocono and also the top headlines going on in the sport as the countdown to the NASCAR playoffs is on. We'll also talk about some of the news and notes, some of the top headlines to get to. We'll have our mailbag segment. And Dominic joins me right now. Dominic, always a pleasure, my friend. Let's get right at it. What a wild race it was at the Chicago Street Course with ultimately Alex Bowman coming away with the win. Just how we all thought it was going to be, right?
Just how we thought. 75 to 1 odds rather, entering the NASCAR race weekend. And not really running up front till the end, but some of the strategy played to his favor. Joey Hand, Brad Keselowski, maybe not so much, but more importantly, Tyler getting that 8th career win, snapping an 80 winless race streak. For him, I believe 74 starts or 75 starts, but dating back all the way to Las Vegas. Or actually, the more I think about that, Tyler, it might be something like 86 NASCAR Cup Series points races, 80 races for Bowman since he did step out of the car last year. So nonetheless, it's been a long time since Alex Bowman won. Tyler, you and I were at that track. We were at the Vegas race where that race went a little crazy at the end and Bowman was able to pull out the victory. So crazy to think. Had you told me in Vegas when we were there a couple of years ago that the next time Bowman would win would be 2 years from now, I wouldn't have believed it.
You know, I can say this, Dom. I feel like two things can be true here. One, Alex Bowman, he won this race because it was shortened. But two, he still earned the win at the same time, too, making that aggressive pass there, holding off Tyler Reddick. I mean, two things can be true. It was an earned win, but at the same time, too, it was a lot had to do with the circumstance of the rain tires and the shortened race and all.
Certainly. There's a lot of factors when you really look at it. We've never seen a race at the Chicago Street Course play out the way it's supposed to with these darkness and rain scenarios and everything that happened. But nonetheless, Bowman was up front when it counted. And let's remember, too, he had a really good pass on Joey Hand with about 7 laps to go, or 8 laps to go, making that race when he passed. He had to be methodical about it. Could have probably easily punted Joey Hand out of the way. What the heck? It's a guy that's in a one-off start, doesn't even run for points in the series, not running for a championship. But I think that speaks to the level of Alex Bowman, the racer who he is. Very methodical, and I even have to say too, Tyler, with that incident with Bubba Wallace early on in the race, and even telling the media post race, I really hope, and I'm paraphrasing, but I hope that Bubba Wallace is not fined or penalized for that because he really didn't even touch me anyway, and I would have been frustrated too.
One more note before we bring in Seth. Let's talk about what this means for Alex Bowman. Yes, he secures a playoff spot, but you heard Jeff Gordon say in the post race that Alex isn't going anywhere, that this is going to shut down the rumors about them making a driver change. Allies very happy with him and all that. But I look at it, Dom, this kind of hits the reset button for him, right? Now that he's got this win out of the way at a track that was not his specialty by any means, and the first win for his crew chief, Blake Harris. I know we all saw that moment, him and Caitlin Vincey, his wife of FS1, there after the race, doing the interview and all that. That was pretty cool. But with all that said, like, you get the monkey off your back here. This is a huge swing potentially for Alex Bowman, who has actually been running pretty well. He's had some good finishes just up until this week, hadn't been able to get the job done. Do you think Alex Bowman's turned a corner here now with this win?
I think so. It's been a theme that we've talked about. How two things here, Tyler. Number one, momentum is everything in this sport, whether it be a points race or a non-points race. If you win something, it's going to just create that natural momentum. And the second point of that, too, we've talked a lot about how last year, Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman had great seasons. When you rally, if you take out the team, take out and just look at the numbers, look at how well they ran. Those are seasons that most drivers would love to have, but that's not good enough if you're going to be in Hendrick Motorsports equipment. You're expected to win. You're expected to make the playoffs bare minimum. You're expected to advance through the rounds of the playoffs. So certainly, I agree with you. This is a reset button. This is an opportunity to really gather over the next 6-7 weeks before the playoffs start. But Alex Bowman is doing what he's expected to be doing.
Yeah, I think so. Dom, our next guest this week, you know pretty well. Tell us about Seth Eggert here.
Seth Eggert, if you have been in a NASCAR media center at a track or on NASCAR Twitter in the last 6, 7, 8 years, chances are you've probably interacted with him or seen some really, really cool stats and stuff that he and his team at Kickin the Tires pump out. Jerry Jordan, of course, friend of the show. And Seth has been a staff writer, I believe, about 3 years with Kickin the Tires, as well as some other motorsports outlets over the years as well. Has a plethora of knowledge when it comes to NASCAR. And I think it's really cool, Tyler. He lives in the hub. He is in North Carolina. We'll get more on that in a little bit. But Seth, thank you so much for joining us this week here on Let's Go Racing with David Starr.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Seth, were you at the Chicago Street Race this year?
Unfortunately, no, and I do want to get out there. It's going to say I hope they go back next year. From what it sounds like, they'll be back next year. Whether or not it's July 4th weekend is might be the only question. But I do want to get out there at some point just to experience a street race for NASCAR. I mean, I've never been to a street course race, period, but still a street course race for NASCAR, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in a future city, because I know several cities have expressed interest. Uh, I would say NASCAR has expressed interest in several other cities as well. So it would be interesting to see just from what we see as a traditional road course or what we see as a traditional oval or even a roval to see how different a street course plays out.
Certainly. We talked about on the show before, Tyler, with Long Beach or maybe somewhere else in the cards. But Tyler, you guys say I'm the stats guy on this show. No, 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 no. Seth is the stats guy. I got to ask you, we got to revisit Chicago before we move on here, Seth. Of all the stuff you saw this race week, and whether it be Xfinity or Cup, was there a particular nugget or a piece of information that just really shocked you or something that maybe you just had to share because it was so cool? Maybe not a lot of people know about this.
Well, I actually did share something on Saturday with SVG, Shane Van Gisbergen, winning the Xfinity race from the pole. It's his second win from the pole. He only has two poles, so he has a 100% pole to win ratio, right?
Wow.
Well, only one other driver has multiple poles and a 100% pole to win ratio. That's in the Truck Series. Mark Martin, 3 poles,
Really?
3 wins.
Huh.
If you're in conversation with Mark Martin, Tyler, you're doing something right.
Yeah. And SVG's got the most wins in the Xfinity series right now, too. So pretty impressive. Seth, take me back. Where did it start for you? Your fandom of NASCAR and getting into the sport and everything. Where did it all begin?
So there's kind of two branches of this. There's mom's side of the family and dad's side of the family. Mom's side of the family, it's a bit complicated. Um, my grandparents survived World War II. They survived the Holocaust. They were in uh, the concentration camps. And moving and immigrating here to the USA embraced this country. And one of the easiest sports for them to go to, believe it or not, was motorsports because my grandfather being in a wheelchair, they just wheeled him into the infield. There was no handicap seating at that point. We're going back to the 50s and 60s after all. So they would just watch. Granted, they went to Wrigley Field, they went to uh, Fenway Park, they went to, you name it, they went to every sport. But NASCAR was the easiest for them to go to. So that's how my mom became a fan. My dad was already a fan. And he was just taking me, whether it's to Flemington, whether it's to Wall Stadium, whether it's to Thompson, Pocono, Dover, etc. So I kind of had it on both sides. And it just stuck with me. I've tried watching other sports, whether it's football, hockey, etc. The only ones I can really get into is motorsports and wrestling. So that's kind of what I've stuck with over the years. There's been times where I've fallen out of love with wrestling just because of the storylines or who is active, who isn't active. But NASCAR, motorsports, it's always been there. And I guess to a certain point, esports as well, since I also cover NASCAR for Kickin Tires as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So you've definitely been immersed in the sport since a very, very young age. You mentioned some of the places you've gotten to go, and of course, you got your collection there behind you. There, if you're
Yep.
watching on the YouTube version, you got some really cool diecast back there.
Yeah.
Is there a favorite diecast you got back there? Tell us the story behind
Well,
it.
well, this is actually a custom of my car from iRacing.
Wow, did you look at that? For those listening, Spotify, all the streaming platforms, I'm going to call it sky blue, right,
Yeah,
Seth? It's got
Petty Blue.
57. Okay. Oh, petty blue. I like it. It's got the Kickin the tires emblem on the hood, and it's a Chevy. Is that a Chevy Camaro?
Yep, it's
Okay.
a Chevy Camaro Cup car. I ran that in several leagues, including what was Monday Night Racing. And the reason why I had this particular one made, I finished third beating Dale Jr. in a race once
Hey,
at
that is worth something.
Daytona.
You could be Dale Jr. on a restrictor plate track. You're doing something right, Seth.
Yes, yes. So I was like, you know what? I want that one.
Mhm.
Just to have a piece of my own virtual racing, but also something that I can actually say is my own. And I don't know if you know Gabe Wood. He's one of the mechanics over on Alpha Prime Racing. That's who made that custom.
You did a
Huh.
really good job.
Yeah.
So on a car like that, you hear about like the custom diecast stuff, and I know there's definitely a market for it. Is that one like vinyl wrapped? Is it hand painted? What's the process
Hand
on that?
painted, he hand painted it and then wrapped it in clear coat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dang. And you know the process like that doesn't happen overnight. That takes some patience. That takes some time.
I think that took 3 months.
Only three.
I well, to be fair, he also works for a team, so
Exactly. No,
yeah.
that's very awesome. No, that car is awesome. If you're not watching on the YouTube version, that's a really cool piece. So I'll have to put that up there and make a big screen. But no, really, really cool. And Seth, I was trying to get Tyler a few years ago into the sim racing scene. We mocked him up a paint scheme and everything, and
Yeah.
just the cards didn't align. But what would be your pitch to Tyler to try the sim racing Rex? We tried getting him on the NR 2003 side, and like I said, it just didn't line up. But what could be a way to reignite that for Tyler?
Apparently, I have to have a PC to do this or something. I'm a Mac
You,
guy. That's my first problem.
you do have to have a PC. You do have to have a PC. But my pitch is if you want to go racing in real life, but whether you can't afford it, whether for whatever reason there's something that can't allow you to actually go and race in real life, the sim racing is the closest thing you can get to it. And at least for me, and I'm saying this not just as a fan, but also as a media member, I've learned a lot more about some of the nuances, whether it's the grip level, whether it's attacking a corner, to understand what's going on track. Uh, Kyle Larson said it this past weekend after racing SVG in the Xfinity race that SVG was taking corners in different angles, shapes, and approaches than he ever thought was possible. I'm looking at it and I'm like, my perfect example, at least my personal example, when Chase Elliott won Canadian Tire Motorsports Park in the Truck Series. Watching the replay over and over throughout the years, I'm sitting here like the angle he entered the corner, there was no way he was going to exit the corner without going wide if Ty Dillon wasn't there. There's all these different nuances of breaking points and viewpoints that it's very informative. That's the way I would word it, and educational as well, because you have, I'll be honest, I at least on the media side, I started out writing about iRacing. Uh, I was on a team years ago, but I didn't have a computer that ran iRacing very well, and they relegated me to being their spotter, and it annoyed me. So I left them and joined an IndyCar team because for some reason my computer could run the IndyCar but not the Cup car. I don't know why. Anyway, they recommend me to take over for them at what was then in Racing News, which got rebranded to iRacing News, and that's how I got the journalism bug.
Okay.
If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have entered journalism. Funny enough, 4 out of my 6 teammates from that original NASCAR team all went on to be in the eNASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series. So
Yeah,
I'm covering a lot of my former teammates.
it's
Uh,
cool to see that.
yeah,
It is so cool to see that when you raced against some of these guys and then they make it to that level. Like I don't know if you knew a lot of the NR 2003 leagues back in the day, but Xander
yeah,
Clemens, I got to give him a shout out with UNSR, ran a really tight ship back in the early 2010s. And there's some of those competitors I used to race against that have gone on to do some great things, whether that be behind the wheel in a NASCAR vehicle or in and around the sport. And names that immediately come to mind, Justin Melillo, friend of the
yep.
show. He was with us at the Racing Experts for a while, and he's working with iRacing now. Brad Perez, Andre Castro. We used to race against these guys, and they were good then too. So, make no mistake, maybe the results aren't there in a NASCAR vehicle because there's a lot more factors at play. But when you're more on an even playing ground, you really get to see who shines. I remember those guys running exceptionally well. Brian Mercurio, who's run on the E Pro side too, Gabe Herschel. There's a lot of guys that come to mind on it. Kevin Haseman, so many. And I know I'm going to miss people, but really cool to see these people excel in that craft and advance. Matt Wishart working with Dalen Barr. I used to race against Matt a long time ago. We always catch up and reminisce when we do. So really cool I know what you mean, Seth. Really cool to see these guys just really take it, run with it, and then they're still in the sport.
I often joke, if you ever don't like what I write, whether it's an opinion story, whether it's a column, or whether it's just something a matter of fact, blame Malik Ray, Stephen Esney, Colin Keister. Yes,
Definitely
they're Coke
recognize those
drivers
names.
now. And, or well, 2 of them are still Coke drivers. One of them retired, but still blame them because those were my teammates that kept referring to me as spotter Seth and relegating me to being a spotter.
There
That
you go.
annoyed me into the journey I am on now.
There you go. And you all are forever connected.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I would
It's
even
funny
say
how
too,
life works.
yes. Oh, absolutely. And even beyond understanding a race car, like you stated, the nuances, I'm even going to take that a step further, Seth, and I'm curious if you agree, but the experiences you get with sim racing. I started when I was in high school and I had a lot of fun with it. And I'll be the first, I was the last car running, but when you're in the back, you learn to miss a lot of wrecks. And the point I'm driving at that is I felt like because of that, being in those situations where I missed a lot of wrecks, that translated to actually being on the road in a real vehicle on the street where I feel like my reaction time's a lot better. And I've been able to avoid potential single car crashes, whether I'm driving or avoiding debris on the road. And I credit a lot of that to that sim racing background in school. And I feel like because I got that fix on the computer and going fast, I never really had the urge to do that on the street.
I completely agree. And I'll be honest, there have been times where I may have taken a corner and probably a little faster than I should have, but for whatever reason, I could feel the grip level, kind of like how you can on iRacing, even though there's no real seat of the pants feel on iRacing. Just the way, something about the visual and knowing what your car is capable of, I was able to take corners a little faster than I probably should have. With that, um, granted, I've gotten better at not doing that. I know I probably have scared a couple people over the years. Um, but that being said, overall, just I kind of view iRacing now not just as a sim to reality platform for drivers, but you could also argue it's a sim to reality platform for graphic designers, media members, broadcasters. I mean, you have Justin Melillo, myself, you have Ryan Kish, you have Noah Lewis did a little bit on iRacing before he moved into the real life world. Uh, you could argue Blake McCandless. He
Right.
did a lot of broadcasting on the sim side, and he's now doing Cars Tour. So I think I don't want to say it's not going to be everybody, but you are going to get a handful of these people to really get into the real life coverage and excel.
I think so too. And I feel like, Seth, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of networking that can go on these platforms, and it's a way to stay relevant too. Like you were mentioning drivers running it. And I remember years ago at Sonoma, that was one of my pieces, it was like 8 years ago, asking drivers how much they were using iRacing because they were going off that off week from Michigan to Sonoma. You have 14 days between races. Are you using iRacing? Are you using anything like that? Granted, like you said, it's not the feel of the seat, but you're still getting those visual viewpoints. And a lot of drivers said, absolutely. It's great. It's great visual. It keeps your mind sharp. And like Tyler, a friend of the show, Tommy Regan, who has raced NASCAR Xfinity Truck Series and Cup Series races, he's a frequent. He is a regular on iRacing. And I know he credits a lot of that to being able to have those viewpoints, to be able to visualize things. And I think it is certainly, Seth, I would say a necessity when it comes to prepping to being a part of the race weekend. iRacing seems like it's got to be in your agenda somewhere.
Fully agree. And uh, funny enough, sorry, Thursday, I don't know when this is going to come out, but Thursday this week, I actually have an interview with Roger Carruth on some stuff for Drive for Diversity and Sim to Reality. And he is, I was going to say, I think him and William Byron are essentially the poster children, no offense to them, for Sim to Reality, even though both somewhat had some real life, at least karting experience to a certain degree beforehand.
Mhm.
But they really honed their skills through iRacing.
There's something to be said about that. I think just being able to get on that practice, that you're mentally conditioning yourself. You know it's a part of your schedule, your routine. I feel like it goes into practice. I would say, Tyler, it would be like maybe a football team watching film or having that hands-on virtual film before going into a game on Sunday. You certainly aren't going to be able to recreate that watching something, but you're still getting something out of it.
Definitely, definitely so. Seth, you mentioned you haven't been to a street race yet, but you want to. What have been some of the tracks you've been to, and what have been some of your favorite places you've been to over the years?
God, let's see, I've been up and down the eastern seaboard. I've, as far as local tracks are concerned, Wall Stadium is always going to have a place in my heart because that was my home track. Flemington as well, even though that's long gone. Nazareth Speedway as well. Uh,
That was a great video game
yep,
track too.
yep,
Mhm.
yep, yep. Dover and Pocono were some of the first tracks I ever went to. Granted, I haven't been able to get back there as a media member just yet. I hope to at some point. But I've been to Charlotte, Darlington, Daytona, Richmond, Martinsville, Bristol Dirt. I do classify them differently. Charlotte Roval, the Charlotte Dirt Track, the ZMAX Dragway at Charlotte, uh, Hickory, Tri-County, Orange County, uh, I want to say Volusia County, Five Flags, Thompson International. I'm sitting here trying to think of any that I might be missing. Bowman Gray, Jennerstown, Myrtle Beach, Kentucky. I want to say that's all of them.
Kentucky
South
was cool.
Boston.
I made an 18 out there to that race week when Truex swept everything. That was a cool racetrack.
Yeah, it was. It was. And granted, Kentucky, I want to say I was there in 19. Yeah, 19, because it was the final year before everything happened. Um, but it was Kentucky was the first race I flew to cover. And honestly, it's actually kind of the only one I've flown to cover because Daytona I've always driven down with friends, just to, have a day essentially to relax driving. But that being said, my favorite track, I would have to go with Darlington. I just love the old school feel, the tire saving and everything that the drivers have to do. But as far as being able to get up close and view a different sort of race, I almost have to go with the Charlotte Roval. because there's nothing like being on the pedestrian bridge as the cars are making a lap underneath you.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I went up there because one of my photographer friends, John Davidson from the Racing Insiders Resource, uh, he said, "Come on, let's go to the bridge." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because I didn't even realize there was a pedestrian bridge. And we went out there for practice, and I'm sitting there like, "Wow," just feeling. And this is back when it was a Gen 6 cars too. So take that sound, multiply it by two, and you get the Gen 7.
I
Right.
gotta say, I was there for that opening weekend in 2018, and that was an awesome race weekend. And I thought it was cool from all the headlines from the top of the field to the bottom, who's
Yep.
going to win the first race, and then Jimmy Johnson to Martin Truex to Stanton Barrett making his cup return and everything in between. There was just so many cool things happening. Jeffrey Earnhardt giving pace car rides on
I
Saturday
was
and
gonna say I
Sunday.
was in the pace car for one of his pace car rides.
That was a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
There was so much fun being able to see the track and actually get a feel for it. And for those not familiar, what we're talking about before the pandemic, and I believe NASCAR has brought these back at select race weekends
Yes.
to further the media's opportunity to really understand. We're talking about iRacing earlier. NASCAR would give reporters that real life opportunity to go in a street sedan, whatever street car or whatever manufacturer was the pace car that weekend. They would have a few street models of that vehicle, and you would get to go with the NASCAR driver out onto the track. They'd run not at full speed, of course, but you would get some sort of feel of how the track is. The driver would kind of share with you how they attack some of the corners, what they might be doing down some of the straightaways. It was really, really good and interactive and a good visual piece to really give you an idea of what was going on. And I thought they did a great job with the roll that weekend. Tyler, did you ever get the chance to do any pace car rides over the years working in the media?
Yeah, yeah. One of my favorites was at Daytona, the day of the 500, getting to ride around with Eric Jones. That was very cool. I interviewed him while we were doing the pace car ride, and so that was cool. Another one of my favorites was with David Reagan at Kansas Speedway, and that was the year that he took over the 55 car, and just seeing how, and he did a pretty decent job, for him to jump in that circumstance and everything. Like it was cool. Those were some of my favorites that I've done. I've also done just with some friends of the show like Matt Humphrey, from NASCAR Communications doing a pace car ride and such. My favorite just experience besides just of with a driver or whatever. For me, guys, there was nothing like doing the pace car ride at Coda and all the twists and turns and all the sharp turns. We watch that race on TV and we see it and it looks challenging. I had a whole different perspective on taking a pace car ride, in a street vehicle on those sharp turns. It just blew my mind. Like, oh my gosh, these guys are racing 3 times faster than what I'm at in this car around these corners. Just unbelievable.
Oh, certainly, certainly. And I got to say to that too, with Pocono a few years back, this was the first time I ever got to do it. It was in 2015. And Seth, you going to Pocono, I think you can appreciate this. This is my first time there. We're there for the July 2015 race weekend, our team. And Justin Allgaier's doing the pace car rides, and he was running Cup at the time, and he's doing them in the Chevy SS. And he tells our crew, it's Justin Malillo, Dante Ricci, our photographer, and myself. Sorry, guys, there's a safety vehicle on a long pond stretch, so we can't go too fast, but we'll make this worthwhile. So we get in and he punches it off pit road. He's hauling ass off turn one. And he goes around the safety vehicle, no problem, goes to the tunnel turn, kind of we may go going 80, 90 miles an hour down that straightaway till we get to turn three. I kid you not, guys, he punches that thing down the front stretch. And that front stretch is about a mile long. And
Yep.
we get to turn one, and I'm sitting in the right rear seat. So I kind of am able to see the tack from where I'm at, and we go off into turn one. I'm thrown in to the door. We were hitting, I'm going to say close to 130 in that corner, but he backed off a little bit. I'm pretty sure we'd gotten at least 140 before hitting that. And that was one of the coolest. I mean, that's your first pace car ride. Nothing's going to top that. So that was really cool to hear the muscle on that Chevy SS. And of course, Justin Allgaier do that ride for us. That was pretty spectacular. How about you, Seth? What's been your favorite?
Well, I've only been able to do three so far. One was Jeffrey Earnhardt at the Roval. Then I want to say it was I want to say it for some reason. I want to say it was Harrison Burton at Martinsville. I want to say it was in the EV truck.
Oh, cool.
E-
I
because the EV truck was the pace vehicle one year. But my favorite one, it wasn't the driver driving it at Darlington. It was I ended up getting a Chevy Blazer, and the driver that I happened to be in, and it was Goodyear offering these pace car rides, not NASCAR. Uh, Joey Chitwood.
Oh, hey, the president of Daytona.
Yep, yep. He was the driver for us. And like you, I was in the right rear, and he punches it going out, and he says we're allowed to go up on the banking. And I'm just thinking like, okay, we're just gonna be on the bottom of the banking. Turn three, we're up against the wall, and I'm sitting there as the wall is going like this over the bumps.
Man,
And
thinking we're gonna be getting a Darlington stripe here, right?
yep, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It was something. I had never experienced that before. I mean, you always hear about the bumps on the track, but this was the first time I really experienced them outside of seeing the visual, either from the onboard or from iRacing, and just to feel the bumps. I have a new appreciation for what they're talking about.
Certainly so. Certainly. Tyler, you'd appreciate this because I know this is your, I guess, now new home track. 2016, we did pace car race with Brennan Poole at Texas Motor Speedway. He did 2 hot laps, and we go off turn 4 onto pit road, and you could feel that bump from the banking to pit road. And he kind of had to jerk the wheel a little bit. And I know you've driven a race car on that track, Texas there, Tyler. So I'm sure you can attest to how bumpy that transition is
Oh yeah.
from turn 4 onto pit road. That was pretty cool to feel that.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Seth, before we move on, get to our news and notes, I got to ask you, you've covered so many stories over the years, whether it be interviews or individual races, whatever it may be. What comes to mind? What have been some of your favorite stories to tell?
There is a lot. I've honestly, I've probably written somewhere around 1,800 stories, if not more. Um, as far as some of my favorites to tell, uh, some of the stories I'm most proud of. Uh, one was back before I was with Kickin Tires. I was with Motorsports Tribune, and it was a story. They had a series called Remembering, in which it was basically a tribute story to the driver that is no longer alive. And I'd written one on Jason Leffler for the 50th anniversary of his passing. And I was able to get in touch with Justin Allgaier, with Casey Kane, with Keith Coons, and several others. And I had never seen some of the drivers tear up before telling stories. That was my first experience with that, and I realized then how big of a story that was. From there, now with Kickin, some of the stories that I would say I'm most proud of. Last year, I wrote one on Frankie Muniz driving the same car, at least chassis-wise, same chassis that Sterling Marlin drove in the 2001 Daytona 500. The same chassis from that infamous last lap with Schrader and Earnhardt. The three drivers that Frankie Muniz met with pre-race that day. Um, at least for this year, uh, one of the stories that I loved telling was Raja Karut earlier this year after his first win, Isabella Robusto's ARCA debut, and an, at least my personal favorite, just because to me it was a fun story to write. Uh, Earlier this spring, during the NMPA convention, the National Motorsports Press Association, we were able to chat with SVG, Justin Haley, and Kaz Grala. Well, I'm sitting there chatting with Justin, And he's telling me this story about how when he and Kaz were first teammates, they didn't like each other. So I go and ask Kaz about that. And what Kaz goes and tells me, he goes into this, I don't want to say rant, but this speech. And I'm sitting here listening to it. I'm like, this is the plot of Step Brothers. Like, they didn't like each other. They kept racing each other hard, basically wrecking each other. And then one day their crew chief said, you know what? You two go out to dinner, have some fun, and try to find something that you're not going to try to kill each other doing. And they went out, found some common interests, and have been best friends ever since.
That's cool. That's
It,
very cool.
it was just a fun story.
You got to
Yeah.
tell both sides. You did your journalism integrity there, where you're telling all sides of a story, and everything checks out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I may or may not be considering entering that into the NPA contest later this year.
There you go. I won't say anything. That's your story to tell, literally.
But that it was a fun one. I think I published it back in March, I want to say. It might have been April. But then some of the other fun stories I've been able to tell over the years, and some that I'm still telling now, uh, kind of stem from those stat charts that I've come up with over the years, which that really started. I have to give credit to Justin Schuler. Um, After Las Vegas 2022, when Bubba had wrecked Kyle Larson, he asked me if there was a way that we might be able to put some previous incidents together to try to predict what kind of penalty that Bubba was going to get. That's what formed that retaliation chart. And it blew up. And kind of using that to transition into this past weekend, that retaliation chart now sits at over 200 entries.
Okay.
Going back to 1964, um, in all of the post-race retaliations, like what Bubba did and what Chase Elliott did, NASCAR's only fined drivers monetarily. The only time they suspended a driver was Jimmy Spencer at Michigan in 2003, but that had other circumstances, including Jimmy punching Kurt in the face, charges being filed, and others. It was an ongoing feud.
Mhm.
Most of the fines have stemmed from pit road incidents post race. The last time an on track post race retaliation had been fined or penalized was with probation to Stephen Wallace versus Matt Kenseth at Memphis Motorsports Park in 2009. That was one of the final races before Boys Have At It.
2010.
Yes. We all remember that very well.
Yes.
Seth's going to stick around. We're going to get to our news and notes, get to our mailbag here in just a bit. Dom, let's start with the headlines. Rodney Childress making a surprising move next year.
Rodney Childers, we know where he's going to be ending up, as it was announced on Tuesday, July 9th. He'll be taking the reins as crew chief of Corey LaJoie's entry at Spire Motorsports starting in 2025 and beyond. So this the two puzzle pieces are not going to be going together with Josh Berry to Wood Brothers, but we know he has a new home, and Rodney Childers will continue his crew chiefing career. And Seth, we'll start with you on this one. I got to say, I'm surprised by this move at first. It seemed like maybe there would have been a Josh Berry, Rodney Childers pairing, a marriage of some sorts at another organization. Your initial thoughts on seeing Childers going to Spire next year?
Honestly, I'm not entirely surprised that he and Josh are not sticking together. And the main reason is where the Wood brothers have that very big, very tight alliance with Team Penske. I don't know if they were going to go with Rodney or somebody from the Penske organization. They did mention that they were going to interview Rodney last Wednesday. Well, in the video that Spire Motorsports released, and in some audio that SiriusXM NASCAR had played earlier today, Rodney had mentioned that he said, let's do this on July 4th. That was less than 24 hours after it was announced Josh Berry was going to the Wood Brothers. So just based on the timeline there, I feel like either Spire offered him something that he was interested in, or maybe Wood Brothers just didn't work out for whatever reason.
Well,
Yeah,
and then the other thing that stands out to me, Tom, is you look at Rodney. He's as good of a crew chief as anybody in the garage, and has done a terrific job, a championship winning crew chief. This is going to be the worst organization he's been with in a long time. He had a better program at Michael Waltrip Racing than what he's walking into at Spire. To me, like I felt like Rodney could have gone to a Hendrick, a Gibbs, or something like that of that caliber. That's the head scratcher to me is why Spire?
it makes you wonder because I was going to ask you too, Tyler, if you feel like this could be maybe a lateral move of some sort, at least on paper, because the numbers aren't
I don't
there.
even think it's a lateral. I think it's a step down.
It's bad. It's at least on paper. But then again, these people are in more conversations and meetings that we're unaware of what's going on. So Rodney could be seeing something that maybe he likes or thinking and playing that long game. We've talked about on the show before, Tyler, how you can make the argument that the investment that Spire Motorsports is making could be comparing it to Front Row Motorsports or to the now extinct Furniture Row Racing, where Furniture Row Racing ran 25th, was lucky to finish on the lead lap for a long time before that team had a big turnaround. So certainly there could be things at play. There's a lot of long-term goals here that this organization has. And of course, they want to fill those trophy cases that Kyle Busch Motorsports had in the new shop that they're in. And Seth, I know you're not too far away there from the Spire Motorsports shop. So maybe you might be able to give more insight on this. Maybe on paper, this does look like a lateral move, but Rodney Childers has to be knowing something we clearly don't.
Well, the way I would look at it is look at, like you said, the investment that they're making, not only in the Cup Series, but also in the Truck Series. They bought out Kyle Busch Motorsports completely. And they have an alliance with Rev Racing. So they have, at least in the Truck Series, they have Raja Karut, they have Nick Sanchez by alliance, and they have Chase Purdy. They also have an alliance with Trackhouse because they're running Connor Zillich in some truck races. So just adding that all together, I don't know if they're trying to be a development organization for these drivers to eventually go off to a Hendrick, go off to a Trackhouse. But by developing these drivers in the Truck Series, they can be learning different techniques that they can maybe transfer to the Cup Series with Carson Hocevar, who's in his rookie year, with a veteran like Corey LaJoie, or even the veteran that's moving over there next year, Michael McDowell.
Yeah, and McDowell too was asked earlier this year at that presser, and you might have been there, Seth. I think
Yes, I
Bob
was.
Parker's asked him, "Is this a lateral move?" This looks like a lateral move, and McDowell seems to have confidence. You add Rodney Childers to your lineup. There's something clearly going on here. This team is doing something right, and I don't know if you agree with it or not, Seth, but I feel like there's a Furniture Row Racing-esque kind of feel to this, where this team is building, getting better every year.
I don't know if it's either going to be comparable to Furniture Row or Front Row, depending on how you're looking at it and its timetable, where they have that one early win, kind of like how Furniture Row did. It makes sense to compare it to them. But at the same time, Furniture Row never got up to more than two cars. They were only a two-car team in that final season. So it's kind of a split between both teams. That being said, something interesting that I do want to point out. When Michael McDowell's press conference happened, they had mentioned, Doug Ducart had mentioned that they were going to have to go look for a crew chief because the current crew chief with Zane Smith is a Trackhouse crew chief. Well, with Rodney coming over, Ryan Sparks is going from being a crew chief to being the competition director. So that still leaves an open crew chief spot.
Right.
So many puzzle pieces that still need to be filled, Tyler. And that kind of leads to the next headline here. And Seth, I know you can give a little more insight. So I'm gonna actually toss this over to you, kind of put you on the
Yeah.
spot. We know that there's a press conference at the time of this taping before we find out that Front Row Motorsports, speaking of them, is going to be having some sort of major announcement. So
Mhm.
the announcement's already going to be out by the time this is out. But what are your sources saying about that announcement? And will you be at that announcement?
Well, I will be at that announcement. My sources are saying the current driver of the 10 car will be there, Noah Gragson. Um, my understanding is, again, speaking of puzzle pieces, with Briscoe going to Joe Gibbs Racing to replace Martin Truex Jr., that's what opened the door at Wood Brothers for Josh Berry. Had Briscoe gone to the Wood Brothers, the sources I have say that Berry would have gone to front row. And had that happened, there might not have been a spot at front row for Gragson.
Wow. Okay. So that
Granted,
go ahead.
that's just what my sources have said. I don't know with how dynamic this silly season is. I don't know how much that changed from when I was told to what it is now. So take that a little bit of a grain of salt. But that being said, it is a very dynamic silly season. I would not be surprised to see even more driver movement in the Cup Series, not to mention Xfinity and trucks as well.
So let's assume that Gragson is going to Front Row Motorsports. This would be his third team in 3 years, in his first 3 years of competition at the Cup level. We've seen some really big improvement from him. He would be staying in the Ford family. And obviously, he's got funding with him, too. I would think, guys, that this would be a very good pickup for Front Row Motorsports after losing Michael McDowell to pick up a driver the caliber of Noah Gragson. I think he's close. He's on the verge of getting victories here.
Oh, certainly, certainly, Seth. I think the driver of the 10 car right now, we're seeing what Noah Gragson can finally do in really good Cup equipment. And I wouldn't even say maybe it's the best Cup equipment, but he is definitely, and I mean this as a compliment, over driving the equipment he has to be able to get better finishes. The top tens he's knocked off, even the points penalty they had from earlier in this year, they seem to have rebounded. And it might take a win to get in that playoffs, but who's not to say, Seth, he could go out and win a race this year? Certainly a big I'm even willing to call it an upgrade because Michael McDowell is on the back half of his career. Noah Gragson's just getting started. You might have a guy in him and Todd Gilliland, young drivers with proven success and who keep getting better with age. There's going to be some good stuff coming out of that front row camp.
Don't forget, front row is also buying one of the SHR charters. So it's going to be Gillen, Gregson, and somebody else for one. For another, it's technically his fourth team because he did spend some time filling in, well, actually fifth. He did some races filling in for Alex Bowman at Hendrick in 22. And he also ran part-time for Colleague
Mm-hmm.
in 22.
Right.
Just about a full season that year. So you could argue he has a lot more experience than some people realize.
Yeah.
Typically, and I'm going to shout out Jackson Todd, another stats guy. Typically, the first win for a driver comes somewhere around race 90 to race 100 for their starts. For Gregson and certain other drivers, I'd almost push that back a little bit because of their unique circumstances, where Gregson filled in for several drivers, where he ran part-time, and on top of that, where Legacy didn't work out the way he had hoped. I wouldn't be surprised if for him that ends up being somewhere around start 150, maybe 160. But if you look at Chase Elliott, he won, I think it was his 99th start. Uh, William Byron won in his, I want to say it was his 91st start. Uh, Bubba Wallace, he's kind of a unique one in this. If you take his starts with 2311 and when he won in the 45 car, which was not a rain shortened race, That was his 70th start.
Mhm.
So you can kind of see it does line up depending on how you're looking at it and how you're defining it.
Yeah.
And almost expanding on that, going to Bowman winning the Chicago Street Course and Chase Elliott winning Texas earlier this year. They both won somewhere around race 40 or 50 after they came back from injury.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like coming back from injury, there is a little bit of a delay as well compared to, say, Brad Keselowski years ago breaking his ankle testing at Road Atlanta and winning the same weekend at Pocono.
So, so the other dominoes of the SHR camp um, still have Ryan Preece trying to figure out what's next. Custer seems like the favorite to get the Cup ride, and then there's Riley Herbst as well on the Xfinity side, who's got the funding with Monster. Seth, what do you see playing out with those three guys? What's the most likely destination for those three drivers?
Well, Custer, I think everyone assumes is going to be the favorite for the Haas factory team.
The Cup car, yeah,
Yes, the Cup car. It's hard not to place him there. And I'm not saying that because of his father, Joe Custer, being the team president. I'm saying that because of his results and the championship he earned last year.
right,
He he's kind of taking the John Hunter Nemechek approach, going back down, redefining himself, reinvigorating himself, remotivating himself, and then coming back stronger and a smarter driver. For Ryan Preece, honestly, I don't know. I It's hard to place where he might end up. Herbst, I have a feeling, and the sources that I've had, I have a feeling he will be in the Cup Series. Maybe with one of the charters that's moving around. Which team, I'm not entirely sure. I've heard one of two teams, so it should be interesting. Again, some of this is the dominoes still falling and
right.
some of the repercussions of each domino falling. Um, it'll also be interesting to see who takes over the two Haas factory team Xfinity rides, assuming
Right.
both Custer and Herbst move up.
Right. Yeah. And we saw Bob Pockrass's report a while back that 2311 could be getting one of those charters for Riley Herbst potentially as a possibility. It seems like to kind of put a bow on this, Dom, of all the shuffling and the musical chairs, the one guy you don't want to be right now is probably Ryan Preece.
You're wanting to stay in the Cup Series. It's looking doubtful right now. And I think we said on the show a couple of weeks ago, winning fixes a lot of things. And Ryan Preece win, or if he rattles off a bunch of great finishes at the end of the year, that kind of throws a little chaos into all these dominoes because then that might make team owners reconsider who they might want to hire, who they could bring in. Of course, funding is going to be a big thing on this too. But you win a race or you finish out the year strong, you're just making your case for yourself to continue on. And that's even the other question too. Do you want to continue in the Cup Series? Or would you go down? One thing I'd heard, Seth, maybe you've heard this too, that Preece might be entertained for that AM racing ride that has opened up with Haley Deegan leaving to maybe make starts this year, or even back to a truck series ride, or even back to the Will and Modified tour. So I feel like Preece does have options, but they may not be as desirable as some of the other drivers that you guys had previously mentioned.
I have heard at least what the AM Racing plans are for their driver lineup through to the start of the playoffs. Um, it wouldn't surprise me to see Preece or a few others in there at some point or another. Uh, I guess this also leads to the question of where does Haley Deegan go? Where does Harrison Burton go? And where does Zane Smith go? Because at
Yeah.
least for Trackhouse kind of has a conundrum that they have to deal with because they have both Suarez and Chastain under contract. They have Zane Smith under contract. And are they really going to keep SVG in the Xfinity Series for another year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think SVG moves up, and I could see maybe we're looking at Zane Smith moving over to one of the Colin cars or something potentially. uh, as far as that goes. We'll see. A lot to work out, a lot of dominoes to fall still. Dom, what else we got?
So this weekend we have NASCAR at Pocono Raceway. They've been going since the 1960s, and the track had hosted for a majority of its time 2 race weekends, but that has since changed since 2022. NASCAR heads to the Pocono Mountains for the Great American Getaway 400. So 160 laps at Pocono. All three of us have been to that racetrack. It is amazing. It's 90 miles west of New York City, north of Philadelphia. If you're not familiar where it's at, it is in a great part of the country. And Tyler, we go into that looking at the NASCAR race opening odds per the Caesars Sportsbook. You had to guess, Tyler, who is our odds-on favorite, and what are their odds?
I would have to guess Denny Hamlin. And I'd probably put his odds at about minus 500.
How about you, Seth? Who's the odds-on favorite, and what are their odds?
If I had to venture a guess, if it's not Hamlin, the only other one that makes sense is Kyle Larson. And I would have to say probably minus 600.
You guys are on the right track. The odds numbers weren't correct, but the names were. Denny Hamlin at plus 400, last year's race winner. Kyle Larson second at plus 500 or 5-1. Martin Truex Jr., past winner at Pocono, sitting at 7.5-1. Christopher Belt, 7-1 as well. Tyler Reddick, William Byron, 8-1 and 9-1 respectively. Chase Elliott, who won the race without leading a lap in 2022, is sitting at 12-1. And as you look on throughout the opening odds, past winners include Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney. They're both 15 and 16-1. Joey Logano, past winner there too, 25-1. Chris Buescher, who won that rain shortened, fog shortened, whatever you want to call it, race in 2016, at 28-1. And some of your long shots down the line include Ryan Preece at 300-1, John Hunter Nemechek at 500-1, Harrison Burton at 1,000-1, Cody Ware 5,000-1 is your lowest or worst odds driver.
Give me Dennis this week. I'll go with Dennis Hamlin to get it done at Pocono. It feels like an easy pick. Seth, who do you got?
I'm going to go a little outside the box on this one. I'm going to go with Bubba Wallace. He's run well there, at least, especially recently, especially since he joined 2311. I want to say that was where he got his first top five with 2311 a few years ago in 2021. And just in general, he's had some consistency. It's just he's been caught up in other incidents by other people, whether it was Alex Bowman at Chicago, whether it was Noah Gragson at New Hampshire. So if he can just avoid getting caught up in something, I think he can pull out a win.
I like that pick. That's a solid pick too. Underdog, undervalued pick if you are betting this week. And Tyler, last week I said Kyle Busch was going to win at the street course. There was a new winner, just wasn't Kyle Busch. I do think we get a new winner this week, but I think he's more of one of the odds-on favorites. He's a past winner at Pocono. Martin Truex Jr. gets his first win of 2024 and officially locks into the playoffs. But that's just me. We'll see what happens as it plays out on Sunday.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. Certainly looking forward to it. Before we get out of here, our mailbag segment, we asked you guys to submit questions to us on X at Star Podcast, Facebook.com/David Star Podcast, and also by email, davidstarpodcast@gmail.com. You could find us there. And our first question in the mailbag this week comes from Henderson. Henderson wants to know, guys, what has been your favorite moment of the NASCAR season so far? Seth, we'll start with you.
Ooh, that's actually a good one. Honestly, I would have to go with the photo finish at Atlanta. The closest photo finish for three cars. And somebody made a compilation video on YouTube. I forget who it was, but they took all of the different motorsports, the three wide photo finishes, and went from the furthest to the closest. And based on that person's research, that Atlanta finish is actually the closest three wide photo finish in racing history.
You know what,
Wow.
Seth? I got to back you up on that one. I was bummed being in Daytona, got rained out, and get the chance to see a single lap of racing, or how our travel accommodations worked. But I was in Atlanta the next week to work that race and to shoot photos on pit road of the cars coming. From my vantage point, it looked like Daniel Suarez won, no question. But you talk to people in the grandstands, they said Kyle Busch won or Ryan Blaney won. So I guess it really depended on where you were at. but I back that up. That had to have been one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And the chaos on pit road where I was standing, everyone's like, who won? Who won? We're looking up at the monitor, and everybody's thinking Blaney won, and scoring shows Suarez had won as they go off into turn one. That was a cool moment. That's something for the rest of my life. When they show NASCAR history highlights, that's going to be there. And to think I was there, that is so cool. How about you, Tyler?
For me, it's the one race that was just a little bit closer of a finish, the Kansas
That's
race.
right.
I
You're
was
bearing
there
the
for
lead. You were
that.
there.
I was. And for me, it's the story too. There's always a story that comes with it, right? We sat through the rain delay. I had to be back at work the next morning in Dallas at 9:30 in the morning. And I drove to Kansas City that weekend. And I gave myself a hard out. All right, this race better start by 6 o'clock, or I'm hitting the road, and I'm that's just going to be it. Like I got to be at work tomorrow. Sure enough, race ends up starting at 5. I get out of there like on the road by 9:30. Drive through the night. End up getting back to Dallas about 5 a.m. Sleep for a few hours. Go to the office at 9:30. Took me about 3 Red Bulls and some Zins to get through the night to be able to make it home, but you live to tell, right? I would have been so mad at myself had I missed that finish. I was so glad not only to see it, but then just the story of sitting through the rain delay, driving through the night. It was all totally worth it for me. That was an incredible moment. That finish there, and Kyle Larson getting it done and starting off the month of May in strong fashion the way he did.
Oh, sir.
So there is actually a small little story slash timing scoring education with that. The reason why it showed up as 000 for everybody at first was it was so close. If you actually take the distance and the last lap speed, it was actually 0.0009 seconds. But
Okay.
NASCAR time and scoring automatically rounds up to the thousand, which is why it's 0.001 seconds.
There you go. It's the nearest one. Yeah, because I feel like something similar happened like that too in that Xfinity race with the 5 or 6 overtimes at Daytona where Tyler
Yep.
Reddick and
And
Elliott
it ended up being
Sadler.
4/10,000ths of a second.
Exactly. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. See, we were talking last week on the show, Seth, about overtime and the whole thing that happened in Nashville and how sometimes those moments create great things. There's some chaos, but that Daytona finish was certainly one of those things. Like, wow, we got that finish out. It was worth the extra 1 hour of racing.
Yeah,
That's so
closest
cool.
finish in NASCAR history there.
Yeah.
All right. Next question in the mailbag this week comes from Patrick. Patrick wants to know, after the Chicago street race, do you guys think we should have more street races? And if so, where should NASCAR look to? Let's start with Dominic this time.
Man, I agree with Seth. We were talking about at the top of the show how maybe NASCAR is looking at other places, other cities. There could be other bids for it. Maybe Long Beach could be because we have that already in place. We know that's not going to happen, but maybe I'm just being selfish here, guys. But being from New Mexico and there's never been a national touring series race here in my home state, I think Albuquerque or Santa Fe would be really, really cool. And I think it would bring in new fans. We talk about Chicago
No,
bringing
thanks.
in
No,
new fans.
no,
But
no.
hey, let me finish. Let me finish here. Well, Chicago brought in new fans. Who's not to say Albuquerque and Santa Fe could bring in some new fans for the NASCAR fan base?
I mean, you're talking what, like the 60th biggest media market in the U.S., you know? Yeah, yeah,
Top 50. Albuquerque, Santa Fe's top 50.
yeah, yeah. That's a no for me, dog. Um, Long Beach would be fun. You know, I gotta say, as much as I've enjoyed the Nashville Super Speedway, um, when they get done building the new Titan Stadium, they're going to bring back the IndyCar street race. I would love to see a NASCAR street race in Nashville. I think that would be a better than racing at the Super Speedway and running through the streets of Broadway and all that with everything that's there. I think that would be a home run for NASCAR if they could do a street race in Nashville. And we've already seen it's a great market for NASCAR, been one of the best additions to the schedule in recent memory. That the one thing I've talked about this before. I've gone to that Nashville race now the last 3 years. It's so fun, and they've done a great job with it. But the big knock on it is it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a good 30 plus minutes away from downtown Nashville. What did NASCAR do with Chicago? They brought the race to the fans directly to them. I think Nashville would be a natural fit, a NASCAR market that loves the sport already. That to me makes a ton of sense. How about you, Seth?
Well, it's funny. I actually had somebody ask me this because during the rain delay on Sunday, I posted a Ask Me Anything, just to try to generate some content and keep fans engaged. And somebody asked me what other cities that I would want to see have a street course. Well, personally, the five that I would pick, just some of it is because of the sight line, some of it is because of the stories. Toronto, Canada, Vancouver, Seattle, another one, Denver, Colorado. Just
Mm.
imagining the cars at that altitude running a street course would be interesting.
Yes.
And then another one, just because of the story, granted, I don't know how feasible it is, but New Orleans.
Mm.
New Orleans would be a different market. Yeah.
And I think it would be an interesting story. Granted, I don't know how feasible it is, but just thinking about racing in the Big Easy.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be a home run. I like those ideas. Um, Guys, before we get out of here and call it a show, Seth, what's going on with you this week, man? You getting out to any races this weekend? What's next in your agenda?
Unfortunately, no. I'll be at the Front Row Motorsports press conference. Granted, I know this is going out after that, but the next race that I will be covering in person as of right now will be the Cars Tour North Wilkesboro race at the start of August, I want to say. And that is the rescheduled race from All-Star Race weekend when it got rained out and we were stuck in Lake Wilkesboro. Um, I'm interested to see if they've had to do any renovations to the media center after some flooding. I know Chris Owens posted about it, and I think others did too, that the photo room, which was next door to the deadline room, had water coming in through the walls.
That
Okay.
sounds like my house from last year, but that's another story.
So I'm I'm interested to see. I hope they didn't have to do too much, but at the same time, at least the next NASCAR race I'll be at, as of right now, scheduled would be the Southern 500. Uh, I would love to go to more races. I just can't afford to, unfortunately. Um, but otherwise, I was gonna say I still have a bunch of stats I'm working on. I'm still trying to finish some of those charts too. Every now and then, I'll be working on one and I get somebody suggesting another one or giving me data for another one. Speaking of earlier, Dom, you had mentioned the fog shortened race that Chris Buescher won. Well, Chris Buescher also won an oval race on wet weather tires. Granted, it was an all-star heat race, but still, he won a race in the rain on an oval, right? There's only one other driver that has won a race in the rain on an oval and a fog-shortened race. Richard Petty.
Mm.
Yeah.
I want to say it was the 1966 Daytona 500. The last 30 or so laps were in essentially a torrential downpour, and they called it 2 laps early. Mind you, 1960s, they still had treaded tires. They weren't the racing slicks yet until 1971. That being said, he then won a fog shortened race in 1971 at Riverside Raceway. So earlier you were saying if you could be in the same sentence as Mark Martin, which that's SVG, Buescher is in the same sentence as Richard Petty.
Man, that's a good headline right there. Chris Buescher,
Yeah.
Richard Pace are the same stat. What is it? There you go.
Dominic, what's going on with you this week?
Yeah, I'll be home here this weekend. We'll be helping our team out remotely. I'm sad to say I won't be in Pocono. Been there like 7 or 8 times. I know you've been there too, Tyler. Seth, you've been there as well. We all know how great that facility is. I'm very biased to that track. I love flying out there for it. I'm sad I'm missing it this week, but I do plan on getting out there someday. I'll be helping our team remotely and doing that. So Seth, one thing on this show, we love to ask Tyler at the end of these things because every year he has something called branded with the Summer of Jones. And it takes him somewhere. Sometimes it's a home weekend in Dallas, Fort Worth. Sometimes he's on the road. Where's the Summer of Jones going this weekend, Tyler?
It's a home weekend this weekend. But I will be on the road the next 2 weekends. I'm going to Galveston for a family trip next week. I need some beach time, need a little getaway. And then the week following, off to Phoenix, where I'll be working the Native American Basketball Invitational. I'm going to call that for the fourth straight year. So one home weekend, and then we're back on the road next week. So that's what's going on in my world. Seth, before we go, plug away. Where can people follow you and find you, man?
Well, on Twitter, and yes, I still call it Twitter, Seth Eggert 91. On Instagram, I believe it's Seth_Eggert 91. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on Discord, I'm on whatever social media platform, I'm basically on it. TikTok, Blue Sky, etc. There's a reason why I'm the social media manager for the NMPA. I try to keep that updated, which I don't know when this is going out, but if you remember, the Q1 Pocono Spirit Award ballot is still out and voting is still open. So be sure to cast your ballot on that.
There you go. Great stuff there. I don't even know what Discord is. But go ahead and follow Seth over there and check him out and see his great content there. Dominic, always a pleasure when we get to do this show each and every week. Make sure to subscribe to the show. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. We certainly appreciate it. So, also, check us out social media, facebook.com/Star Podcasts, X at @Star_podcast. And also, you can reach out to us on email, davidstarpodcast@gmail.com. For Dominic Aragon and Seth Eggert, I'm Tyler Jones. We'll put the checkered flag out on this edition of Let's Go Racing. We will see you all next week. So long, everybody.